Welcome, everyone. This is Poets in Conversation. I'm Phyllis Klein. And tonight we have Connie Post and Janine Certo with us. Prepare to be deeply moved. We'll be traveling so many highways in a panorama of fabulous poetry, pain, suffering, grief and loss, child abuse, death, and redemption and joy. That's quite a journey. These poems are gorgeous depictions of very difficult human experiences and traumas. Through it all weaves the thread of love for oneself and truth-telling, which we'll be talking about during the reading, where poems become prayers to the poetry god who never abandons or disappoints. In getting to know Connie and Janine, I find that their poems are gifts from deep and essential sources of awakening and healing. Join me in welcoming them. So now I'm going to read a poem of mine, and this is from my book, The Full Moon Herald, which is a poetic newspaper. And in the spirit of truth-telling, when I asked myself what would be the right poem to start with, this one raised its hand, because it's about trauma and its aftermath. It's called Moratorium. I long for lacrimose, for the beggar in a dog's eyes. I'm yearning for rain in deluge or drizzle, liquid as in laments. 1,000 purple umbrellas as they float over my city. Where does it hide, this sorrow? In a secret room above my shop, in a place a thief wouldn't find, behind a wall, under a stone, in the dirt. I can feel it brim in my exhausted eyes, brimming. For my neighbor's mottled mind, she comes to my door to say her sweet husband of 48 years wants to kill her. Brim for the children in the pictures, kidnapped over an address. To sob seems appropriate. Such a luxury, release the ache, water my dehydrated lawn. For the heat and its cousins, flood, fire, pollution, for bullets, for childhood. I could go on and on. The newspaper should be too wet to read, memories too barbed to feel. Hurricane Phyllis, broken up over the ocean, drifting away. Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce Connie. And it's my pleasure to introduce Connie Post. She gives herself permission to be deeply herself. She served as the first poet laureate of Livermore, California. Connie Post's work has appeared in Calyx, Slipstream, River Styx, Spoon River, Poetry Review, and Verse Daily. Her poetry awards include the Leocora Award and Crab Creek Poetry Award. Her first full-length book, Floodwater, won the 2014 Lyrebird Award. Her most recent full-length book, Meridian, was released in 2020. Connie is a poet who delves deep into issues of trauma and abuse and its profound effects on our lives. Her work examines the earth and the damage to our environment and how it parallels trauma to the body. She also writes about her son with profound disabilities and advocates for her son and those who do not have a voice. So I'll turn it over to you, Connie.
Thank you, Phyllis. What a wonderful introduction. So I don't really think I need to say too much about the book because it was so well introduced. But for content warning, if you have any sort of history with trauma, please take care of yourself during the reading. But I also wanted to say I'm so happy to be here and especially very delighted to be reading with Janine, who I really admire as a person and a poet, and her book, which you're going to hear from, is just so beautiful and exquisite. And she reached out to me a couple of years ago when Prime Meridian came out. It's just kind of been like the love ever since. I just, those people you feel profoundly connected to for just right away. So she's just a delight in every way. So I'm going to read some poems from Prime Meridian. I'll just show you the cover because I love this cover, and from Glasslyre Press. And then I'll probably end. I have a new book coming out in February 2023 from New York Quarterly Books called Between Twilight. So I'll do a couple of teasers for that. So as Phyllis said, some of the work I do is paralleling my journeys with Earth as in my journeys with trauma. So I'll open with Walking Beside October. I come across a blue-gray salamander frozen in the middle of the wooden bridge. I step over it and it thanks me by scurrying away. I think of the way I used to stop in the hallway when you'd pass, hoping you would not spill your Jack Daniels down my legs, hoping your shirt buttons were fastened. I remind myself why I take walks at dusk when the sunlight abandons the house. I hear solstice calling me home. I hear the salamander move the weeds aside and run back to the shallow creek bed. I look back and thank this traveler of this small country for teaching me how to move across a rugged terrain without a passport or even a name. The next one is about what many of us as kids grew up with, a hula hoop with, I will admit, a dark twist. So in 2008, the hula hoop turned 50. So hula hoop turns 50. In 1967, there were few things I wanted more than my own cylindrical, smooth, plastic, neon pink hoop. Like a story, I climbed inside the sphere again and again when my waist was still straight and bony. Countless times I dropped into the back patio. The scratches around the rim always appeared after the first few days of summer. I never understood the shoop shoop noise, what places of the earth were inside of it, but it must have been the deepest black. I believed it had something to do with the reason my father walked towards me so often, watching intently the motion of my hips, teaching my body to understand the irrevocable forces of gravity. Each week I learned better how to navigate my own talents. I already knew I was a sinner, as Mother told me, for not saying my prayers. But I knew better than she what was important. I practiced all the time. I was bonded to the idea of retrieval, how the hoop would drop down below my knees, spiral downwards, how desperately I needed to predict descent. The summers passed, the patio covering crumbled in unpredictable patterns. Eventually, I started practicing in the side yard, but he found me anyway. I forgot how to pray, but each day I would rehearse, understanding better each time, the undulations of a broken dance, the sound of the death rattle. I'm going to read a poem that I feel like after the Me Too movement, so many people were given a different kind of permission to come forward with their stories, which I think was really positive. So I know who somebody, I'm going to mute that person. I can't. It's Jane who's unmuted, who needs to be muted. I'm going to read a poem called For All of Us Who, and it's just really kind of an amalgamation of all the different scenarios in which people experience trauma. For all of us who, that's the title. It was my brother, it was my uncle. I was alone, someone was in the next room. It was my father. I was young, I was in 3rd grade. I was in college, I knew him. I didn't know him. He put something in my drink. I was wearing winter clothes. I wasn't wearing any clothes. I was on my way to work. I was on my way home. I was afraid of him. He told me he would fire me. He told me he would kill me. He told me to shut up or he'd take the kids. He told me I was a whore. He told me I teased him. He told me I would ruin the family. He told me no one would believe me, and he said nothing and stared through me until I was dead. I didn't tell for years. I told and was not believed. I have never told. I have bad dreams. I avoid parties. I avoid dark rooms. I avoid long, lurking glances. I avoid skirts or winter or summer or seasons where my skin remembers violation. I drink. I don't eat. I keep quiet. I tell my friends. I take pills. I don't walk alone at night. I hold my lover's hand. I worry too much about my kids. I need to tell the truth. There's been several times after one of my readings where people would contact me with their I've never told anybody's story, so I consider that a great honor. This one is just about loss of sleep, which I think a lot of trauma survivors have, and especially after menopause, to be honest. So this one's called Give It Back. I ask the night to give back all the sleep it has taken from me, but it laughs at me as if I'm a peasant approaching the leader of an oppressed country. I will not grovel in the gray of dusk. I will not pray for morning. I will wade through the layers of dawn as if it's murky water that leads me out of a dungeon. And when all of the soldiers of morning line up to meet me, I will salute them in silence, drop to my knees, kiss the ground, as if it's the first time I have traveled to this foreign land. I always know it's bad when I see the light of dawn coming through the curtains and I still haven't slept. This poem is about Nadia Comaneci. A couple of Olympics ago, I was watching all the gymnasts, and then I started to reflect back on how obsessed I was with Nadia Comaneci and how different the routines were then. They were a lot more complex than now, but it got me to just having thoughts about her. 1976 YouTube of Nadia Comaneci. I watched the video over and over, fixate on her thin frame, her small poised hands. She was 14. I was 14. Her body takes flight above the uneven parallel bars, the first perfect 10 score. I sat on the hardwood floor, my legs crossed, pretzel-like, breakable. In 1976, I too was practicing floor exercise and found ways to unfold my body. I learned how to hold myself in specific postures, found ways to fall gracefully. Often I wondered about Romania. I wondered about small rooms and the way she looked at herself in the mirror late at night. I watched Nadia. I watched her. I prayed for her safe landing. I kneeled in front of the television set and ignored the smell of booze and the particular way it crept under my door at night. I wonder now if she looks back. Does she ponder how she escaped? How a young woman will cross a border decades later, knowing she can never return. I left home very young also, and I never went back. When I was in grade school, my father used to say, I could snap your arm like a twig. I went outside every day, spending more time with the trees, learning the language of the bark while unfolding myself under the shade. I went on long walks, collected broken branches and garbage from the roadside. I tripped over roots sticking out like bone from the earth's skin. As the years went by, I built a tree house nobody knows about. There are no doors, just quiet places to enter and exit. So this is gardening, and my dad was a big gardener, and I always think it's interesting how when you're traumatized, most people have we're associative beings, but we have very positive associations. Like, how could you have a negative association about a garden? But here's the poem. Gardening. After my father would beat one of us, he would place flowers on the kitchen table the next morning. He cut the stems flush and laid the begonias in a circle in an inch of water. The lavender and the fuchsia permeated the morning. We were called to breakfast. We ate waffles and said nothing of the raging blooms. The apologies buried in the ordered way the flowers were arranged. We looked down at our plates, eating, gorging, ignoring his sun-scorched hands. These days, I spend time pulling petals out of my body, placing a shovel in the open earth, placing flowers back into the ground. This next one is, thank you, Forgotten War. And many of you may know that the Korean War was also known as the Forgotten War. You stumbled around the house through most of the 1970s, sometimes muttering things about young Korean girls I didn't understand. You took long fishing trips to the dark water and wouldn't return until there was no breath left in that lake. I asked Mom about it once. I knew you had been in a war, but didn't understand it had anything to do with your off-center gait, the rage you held in your right shoulder, the passing out at 7 p.m. on the couch. One day I went to get a popsicle in the garage refrigerator and you were standing there, one hand as always on the Pabst Blue Ribbon, and I asked you, did you ever kill anyone in the war? You went silent, looked away. But I knew already. I knew it in the way you laid the hooked fish on the counter, the way you cut one long line down each body, severing their forgiven skins. Taking the eyes out, saying they were a delicacy in other countries. You seen in me how relieved I was they could not see you anymore. I knew the lake would someday disavow the fish as I have you. But at times when I drive past a murky lake, I still see us stumbling over the soul-soaked fields of our forgotten war. And soul is spelled S-E-O-U-L for Seoul, Korea. And so then here's another fish one, deboning a fish. I wonder what the fish saw in my father before he gutted them. Were they relieved to know they'd soon be out of misery? Relieved to stop the gasping for air, to cease the futile flailing around the countertop? Did they wait within themselves and pray for the long knife? Did they remember the lake, its muddy bottom, knowing they can never return? You can tell me, and I already know, that fish don't understand these kinds of things, but neither does a small child. At some point, don't we all beg for mercy? So it's interesting to me how we have displaced our trauma and other things. So like when I see fish dying in our fish pond, I feel actually really traumatized by it because those experiences of my own got displaced onto other things. This is a poem by my mom, who was very much a part of what happened to me. Iron Will. When the years were lean, my mother ironed the clothing of others to make ends meet. She pressed through the day when my father was gone working 2 jobs. I watched her smooth the history out of each rumpled seam. As the steam rose from the fabric, I understood how precision lives the quiet life of rage. I asked her often, when are you going to be done? But she never answered. The days bled into years of beatings, followed by the imperative seance of silence. I left home young, my car full of short skirts and wrinkled blouses. As the decades passed, I turned away, but sometimes I still see her standing there, fastening a floral apron, tripping on the cord of her own life, rising, falling, putting garments back on their hangers, adjusting the collars, following the crease lines just so. Next one, anybody who knows me well know I have tremendous back problems. And part of it stems, a very small part, from all of us, all my sisters having scoliosis, but 2 of my sisters had much worse scoliosis than me. Curvature, at least then, now mine's worse. Curvature of the spine, sister 1 year older than me. I watched the doctors trace lines down your back with an index finger. I watched you bend over time and time again, touch the barren floor as they measured the curve, the stubborn spine, the radiologist telling mom what to expect, reminding us how a body makes up its mind. The heavy radiation aprons falling from your thin body, your pelvic bones off center. After each checkup, I grasped my own bones at night, making sure they weren't winding out of control. The years passed, the hairbrush beatings got worse. The scoliosis followed you to high school, the awkward braces, the tightening of the bodice around the ribs, how you already understood the language of shallow breath. The only time you were allowed to take off the brace was bedtime. I watched you unlace each strap, the sores from abrasion, the pulling, spoke like ancient rubbings from a cave wall. You never said a thing as you snuck quietly into the bed next to me. You always turned off the lamp first. I waited for night to be over, for contrition. I waited until I heard your steady, full breath, as if you already knew our survival was curving into itself. So I'll read one more from Prime Meridian. This is my closing poem. And the story is self-explanatory, but we really did have this squirrel in the backyard, black squirrel, which brought up a lot of issues for me. Omen. For 3 years, the black squirrel visits our backyard. I say I hate it. It doesn't look right. I read in science magazines that it's a mutation, a normal occurrence in nature, but every day I think it's a bad omen. Every day I encourage the dog to run after him. I watch his whirling, curling ascent up the tree. I find relief as he moves away from me into the next yard. Winter passes through me. A close friend my age dies of a brain tumor. I do not wear black to the funeral. Later that week, I step outside in mid-afternoon and see the black squirrel sitting quietly by our pond. Our eyes meet, and for that split second, I see how I have banished the secret body within the body. I see his small heart pulsing, how sorrow fills a cavern and keeps beating. And then I'll just move to a couple of thank you guys. I'm going to move to I think I have about 3 or 4 more minutes, don't I, Phyllis? Yeah. So my book, Between Twilight, I'll be moving away from some trauma. And this is just basically a poem about marriage. Directions. I follow the written directions beside me as on the passenger seat. I find the house by reading the names on each street. Off the main thoroughfare, I take 2 lefts, 1 slight right. It says if I pass the stop sign, I've gone too far. Weeks pass and soon I know how to get there by instincts. Weeks become years. I no longer look at the signs. Instead, I listen to my favorite radio station and turn each corner without a single thought. The way I turn into you at night, the street lamps blur to skin, the cul-de-sac of your curved back, the curb of your hip bones, and my skin warming, coasting into yours. Recently, I had somebody very dear to me. Her name was Rita. She was my mother-in-law from my first marriage, but really stayed like my real mother my whole life. And this is, she passed in 2017. Dwelling. The money for the house sale landed in your bank account today. I saw the dollar figure and thought only of a small yellow house down a long gravel road in Yuba County. I've saved all your paintings and the portraits you did not finish. I've saved all the letters your parents wrote you in the 1950s. I don't visit your graves often enough. I trip over the divots when the grass is wet and land face forward in places I am not welcome. I've saved the last $7 from your wallet. It's the only part of your state that has not been inventoried. I called the water company to cancel your account, and they told me the new family is already there. I see them washing their hands in your stainless steel sink. I see them opening the front door when the sun comes up. I see them stacking firewood for the long winter ahead. It's one of the images I'll always remember. She was a farm lady, a Danish farm lady, and she was constantly stacking wood. I'll close with a short one called What to Say. Why speak of sorrow when it slips out of the mouths of the broken birds clutching to the telephone lines? Why speak of regret when the black feral cat runs into the hedges upon your turn into the drive? Why speak of rage when the car skids on the slick ice in the opposite direction of your intentions? Why tell anyone about the secret paralysis that seizes you during sleep? Why speak to the rabid moon when the crickets are muted and starving on the dark? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Connie. Wow. That was just beautiful.
Thank you.
So let me see if they're, so let's have Janine. Why don't you join us, Janine?
I'm here.
There she is.
Oh, there she is.
You can also email me for a book. I'll just put that in there if you want to email for a signed copy.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah.
Connie, that was just remarkable. You know,
thank you.
When I first read Prime Meridian, you know, I'm the kind of person who reads a collection in one reading. You know, I just am. I like to experience a collection in one reading. And I tend to earmark the poems that I love the most. You know, your collection, Prime Meridian, I said out loud, wow, so many times. You know, I think you have such a gift at landing a poem, you know, in the right way. Mm-hmm. And that it's just, there's a believability in that you take an observation and it catapults you back to a memory and to trauma, and it's gripping, right? I mean, I feel like I stay with you. You know, I stay with you as a writer, and
you humble me. You do.
No, I really appreciate you and this reading tonight. It was astonishing.
So when the book came out, I just didn't know if it would hit the mark. And I also had all the fears that a lot of people do when they're telling the truth. And then honestly, Janine was one of the first people that made it feel like, okay, like it wasn't like it actually people saw what I was trying to do with the book and then acknowledged the fears. So Janine was one of my first people that I had not ever met before, from Facebook or whatever. So it's just, I appreciate it so much. I can't begin to tell you. So wow, back to you.
So Janine, do you want to tell a little bit of the story of how you decided to email Connie? And
yeah, one of the things that I just think is so important, just for me, I'm an avid reader, of many genres, but poetry being at the top. And when I read a collection that strikes me, whether it's like just at the heart of my life, whether it's through a connection or through craft or I feel compelled to reach out, and I email the person out of the blue. And I've done that maybe 6 times in my life, where wow. I just have taken the courage to say, you know what, and I have always gotten a response, and I have always been humbled by those responses where people have said, and I almost feel apologetic when I'm doing that.
You were a little bit apologetic. I'm like, please don't say you're sorry.
Right. I think, sometimes our culture teaches us that when we do such things, it displays weakness, or perhaps you want something from the other person. And that's not at all why I do it. I'm just so grateful for the gift, and I don't know. I don't know why I do it. I just do it. And
which is good. I'm
glad you do.
But every time I have received a response back, and it has always been very moving. People have said, you have no idea how much this means to me. Something out of the blue like this. And I just think it's a reminder to us as artists and as readers and spectators that this work is lonely, and it's lonely sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes, but very lonely. Yeah.
And that it's meaningful when you reach out and you tell someone that something made a difference to you.
Well, especially when it's such a personal work. And you're, obviously feeling a little trepidation about putting it out there. So
or terror or trepidation.
Yeah, right. And so, but you two have never met in person, is that right?
No, but are you in AWP?
I'm on AWP, yeah.
Oh, good. So I'm going to see. That will be our Ellis
Awesome.
Island.
Yeah.
I'm really happy the two of you are going to get to meet. Yeah.
Yeah,
seems
really
like you.
about it. And also, the other thing I've discovered is that Janine and I were both Italian, and she loves to cook. And she cooks new Italian, but I cook other old school with greasy Italian lasagna cooking. And we love dogs, so we found out we have all these other things in common as well.
Lovely, yeah. Well, so let's see. So there's a couple of comments in the chat. I don't want to miss them. So Sandy Anfang says, beautiful reading, Connie. I enjoyed hearing you read poems from your latest book and also the new ones. Thanks so much for your openness and your poems.
Thank you, Sandy. I've known Sandy she does a wonderful host of a series in Petaluma.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll talk with her later when we open up. Yeah, Donna Beal says, I did the same, heard Connie read and stalked her. LOL. Has become a wonderful virtual friendship. She read my favorites tonight from Prime Meridian.
Oh, thank you, Donna. I never considered you stalkery, so I thought you were lovely, and I was very. I felt lots of an instant connection with you. So,
well, what I'm experiencing hearing you read is I've heard you read, at least once or twice before this, and then I've read your book at probably 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
And every time I do, it just feels like there's so much more to get out of it. I really don't want to ever stop reading it. So, and then hearing you read it, it just, because I've read it so much the words are somewhat familiar now, and it can grab me in a way that's even more compelling. So
Phyllis, thank you. I also, that's another connection with Phyllis. She reached out to me through a mutual friend we have named Paul.
Right.
And then it was same
Paul
kind of thing. But
Caricone,
all of what you're saying on the chat and all you're saying to me personally, I really just can't tell you. I can't tell you what it means. I mean, when you read these kind of comments, you're little, you know how you kind of have a little hot, melted wax kind of down the center of your body, because it never, I think we all become writers because we hope that we will reach across the great divide of whatever the divide is and reach into the soul of somebody else's. That's our great hope, I believe, for most writers.
Yeah. So let me read a couple more comments, and then we'll go to Janine. Catherine says, each reading of Prime Meridian is devastating in remembered and new ways.
Catherine.
And it's devastating in the most, just to add, in the most gorgeous of ways. So, and I want to talk to you about Last Lines. I thought we'd have a Last Line festival maybe during the conversation.
I'm a Last Line, like I'm completely obsessed with Last Lines.
Well, it shows, yeah. Let's see, and let's see. Also read When the Sun Drops, and bought books for friends. It is also an amazing book.
Thank you. That's my son. I have a son, as I mentioned, who's 36, and I wrote a book about poems about him when he was in his 20s, and the focus is what happens to somebody with profound disabilities when they're older, because I think it's an unexamined journey, a lot of the kid journey, and it's just about love and acceptance in most ways. But that book still, it's been published for like 10 years. They're doing a second printing, I think, because of the subject matter. Parents are always coping with what it means to have an adult child with disabilities. Their needs don't go away, and so
absolutely. Didn't you just go give a talk to a bunch of doctors about that?
I was my Facebook friends know this, but I gave a talk on September 6th to a group of dentists and doctors in San Francisco about Thomas, as from the book, because Thomas needed a dental procedure, and I got to know the head of it, and he had this big conference for the American Academy of Developmental Medicine and Dentistry. That's a mouthful, but it's about how people with special needs have their medical, and in this case, their dental needs met, because it's very difficult and complicated for a lot of reasons. And so for me, it's a huge accomplishment to reach out of the circle of poetry and have your poems address doctors and dentists. They have a very different way that they think about things, problems, solution, and all that. But as a parent, when you say this is where we're coming from, I got a lot of nice compliments afterwards from the doctors and dentists. I really was happy that it reached them in a real way.
Yeah, good. That's really amazing. Yeah. So Myrna Herschel says, Connie, thank you for this heart-rending reading. What a gift.
Oh, thank you. Just thank you. I'm just so grateful for all of you.
And we're grateful for you too. Yeah. So, okay. Well, so now I'm going to introduce Janine.
You're in for a real treat, and then I'll go off on mute, but she's amazing.
Oh, yeah. Let's see if I can do her justice here with this introduction. Janine Certo gives herself permission to be deeply herself. And I'm really thrilled to introduce her tonight. She is the author of 5 books, 3 full-length poetry collections, O Body of Bliss, which is forthcoming in 2023 from Longleaf Press, Elixir, which is the book that she'll be reading mostly from tonight, which is from New American Press and Bordighera Press, and In the Corner of the Living from Main Street Rag. And then we have the poetry chapbook, Home Altar, forthcoming in 2022 from Seven Kitchens Press, and a book of poetry scholarship, Children Writing Poems, Poetic Voices in and Out of School from Routledge. So lots of books here. Yeah. A winner of Nimrod International Journal's Pablo Neruda Prize for Poetry. Her poems appear in many journals and anthologies. She is an associate professor at Michigan State University. Connie is a Janine. Janine is a 3rd generation Italian-American woman who became friends with Connie Post, there's Connie, after reading Connie's book, Prime Meridian, and taking a risk to email her with a grateful thank you for this gift. Janine writes poetry for a multitude of reasons, including a desire to feel everything there is to feel. So let's feel what Janine has to offer. Thanks, Janine.
Phyllis, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, and also for hosting this really gorgeous series in such an elegant way. And I want to thank Connie, of course, not only for her reading, which I just did, but also for inviting me. Connie was the one who said, I want Janine to join me in this Poets and Conversation series. And so it's just a really pleasure to be a part of this venue. And thank you all for coming tonight. I know there's other things you could have done on a Saturday night at 7, and I'm just grateful to be here with you. I completely love Connie's book, Prime Meridian, but I also really want to give a shout out to Phyllis, and her work is really beautiful. I'm actually going to be teaching Jane Hirschfield's Given Sugar, Given Salt book in class next week at Michigan State University. And Phyllis, many of your poems remind me of Jane Hirschfield. They're just these gorgeous abstractions, and I just love he falls asleep in a wooden library chair, and just the incredible courage that it takes to write poems, and difficulty it takes to write poems from the news. You sort of have an ode to and an elegy rather to Charlottesville, and I lived in Charlottesville for many years, so I really appreciated that poem. But without further delay, I'm going to read mostly from Elixir tonight. I'll read for about 15 minutes or so, and then I have a new collection coming out in January, Oh Body of Bliss, and I'll read a few poems from there as well. So thank you all so much for coming. I'm going to start with an Ars Poetica, which opens my collection. And probably a lot of you know what an Ars Poetica is, but in case there are those who don't, an Ars Poetica is a poem that talks about the art of poetry writing, or gives advice for how to write a poem. And I thought perhaps in the middle of this reading, it might be nice to read him a poem about how to write poetry. Drag heavy pot to shed. Squint at the barred owl, then race down the steep hill of your childhood. You lost the dog, but found your grandmother, who drank a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Shake her 10 times. Prepare a fine cheese, sliced peach, hazelnuts, drizzle with honey. Slide it under the bed to the monster. Hear the crack in a mother's voice who says it would be so easy to go down to the garage, turn the ignition on. What will you do with all this moonlight on the pond at once galaxies, scattered photons, shards of glass? If you want truth, see how the Pope's Swiss guard curses at tourists, throws stones at pigeons in the square. Play a game of chase the trees for leaves like wine in a human heart, darker than the blood it pumps, the beating silence in those hours cleaning after they took away your father's body. I tell you, we cannot say love enough times. The vacuum's defective, so it sings. Right, until the sage and fir candle kills the smell of the wall's rotting mouse. Look over your shoulder for the child you never had, the sibling you left in the front yard, the dog returning bread in her mouth. Revisit title. Now your words are the loose parts of a rocking chair, the longing for meadow, some ground of consciousness, what the philosopher called the dialectic of inside, outside. And when you're close, smear the shapes of ghosts, draw grief, a warm bath. Lately, there is little spring or fall, but keep the large bright mum in its pot until the flowers are dull, their necks broken. so that Ars Poetica sort of pulls together different themes in my collection, Elixir. I don't really characterize this work as a work of trauma necessarily, but I do characterize it as a work that has a theme of anxiety and anticipatory grief and illness, and a relationship to a father that is very different from the one in Connie's reading. Elixir is a lot about my father's almost 30-year illness with severe peripheral neuropathy. And he had excruciating pain for about 30 years, so much so that he had a morphine pump in his spine. And so he was either sleeping or just really having pain that was sort of on a scale of 8 or 9, on a scale of 1 to 10. And such a thing kind of defines a family. And my father was somebody who I thought the world of him, and he thought the world of me. And this book is a lot sort of about that journey and that his illness and that sort of anticipatory grief, among other things. So I'm going to open. I read when I was organizing Elixir and figuring out how to order the poems. I had read a lot of books on how to organize a poetry collection, and a lot of people said, you know what, start your collection off with beauty. Have a poem that highlights beauty. And I said, well, let's go for that. After rescuing the dying butterfly from my sidewalk, the woman at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center put me on hold, came back to say, don't bother. It would be dead in 2 to 6 weeks. I picked it out of the shoebox. Head, thorax, and abdomen tilted over, a sailboat with a torn jib. I gently pinched its wings, trimmed the black margins until both wings were even sized. I clipped paper the size of the damaged spot, dabbed glue on the repair site, and considered my foolish stubbornness as I applied powder, its legs still kicking. In the garden beds, my monarch slipped down a stick, labored to open its new wings, and just when I thought the effort failed, it flew away. How short of a life would it take to matter? How many of us travel roads before rigs shift gears, surrounding us like barricades with their diesel and cargo, or keep away from water for the scratch of blood coral, the brush of a ray? We board up windows to stave off hurricanes that tumble at us like hay bales, or avoid the atmosphere unexplored, never booking the morning's first flight. I want to know the symmetry of a monarch, how it enjoys this sweet, bright life full of heartbeat and memory, as if there would always be milkweed and an infinite variety of flowers. So I suffered from panic attacks for several years, and much of it was connected to anticipatory grief related to my father's death, and so I actually have poems that address some of those fears and anxieties in Elixir. So for those who don't know, agoraphobia is the fear of really wide open spaces. Agoraphobia. On my knees before the first leaves to open. Jennifer Militello. You're reminded of walking paths picking strawberries, dogwoods scattering their white, how all that outside waits. Some winged thing between window and screen, and for no reason, groundswell, extraction of air, a geodesy flip like hands slipping off the earth or missing the exit and caught in a line of cars, semis, 100 moths colliding, rising in your chest, and the heart's misfiring, then over a bridge, then catapulting through a tunnel, the darkness and interminable river, and someone keeps mouthing, bend backwards over this mountain. So as Connie had mentioned, we both share an Italian-American heritage. I was raised Catholic, and I'm grateful for the religion that in which I was raised. I think it has beautiful stories, and I have abandoned Catholic dogma. And I just thought it was really interesting as a poet to sort of write a poem about what that's like to lose a religion, because there was sort of a grief in losing Catholic dogma. And there's also an epigraph with this poem as well. Losing a religion. Beyond the window, some kind of small black thing shot across the sky. Haruki Murakami. Once on a run, wildflowers by the road, but when I called into the canyon, nothing came back. Once I restored a ceiling, but water kept seeping, saltpeter, soot, and dirt, too much efflorescence. I tried to rub a fresco with bread, dipped a sponge into wine. A statue looked sullen, split at the eye. Each time someone loses a religion, a rock gets kicked up by a semi, leaving a fissure on a windshield the shape of a web like the one a spider clutches in my house where I turn pages of poems. The landscape's so dark, a patch of river drenched in light. I pick morels from a church courtyard, folded an omelet the color of transcendence. If I could, I would smooth all the stones. I would gather the world's suffering and arrange it into lilies, even as ants scatter over their petals. I believe in new edges, the trees rustling like breath, the grace of soft rain, knowing the long blade will keep coming back. But when I open my palm, it bursts 1,000 small birds. So Elixir is also about the concept of home, the very complex, construct of home. Home as a dwelling, home as a place, home as like a native land, and returning to home also. And so I'm going to read a poem, one poem about fear, and then I'm going to go into a poem about returning to home. And then right after that, I'm going to read a pantoum for my father. Lygrophobia is the fear of loud noises. Lygrophobia. The terriers bark, asphalt breaks, a horn, a near-miss crash, a siren. Where is it coming from? The PA system coming down from each sound, blood rush, veins like rivers to fingers, back up like the torture of anticipating a balloon at the pinnacle of burst. Though there's no parade, no carnival, just the roar and spin of the exhaust above the range, the blender's torque, 2 horsepower motor and aircraft blades jarring the vortex. How it can be that even Bach's bright-throated flute and dialogue is all agitate, long-held high notes, preparing for the ritornello as the phone rings, the news you fear, and names someone only meant to whisper. We return to where we were born. Heading home, we siblings became water, reminiscing that trip to Bermuda, body surfing the waves with our father. Children, we knew nothing of the Buddha, how we're constantly changing, never safe, that Upadana, Sanskrit for clinging, also means fuel. We'd always been afraid of building fires, of overfeeding, their size doubling, or being distracted. But after we'd nursed our father at home, we stacked a pine pyramid, struck a match. Which wave is a father on the ocean? We both cried out when a warm current came. Our father was holy, aflame. Elixir for my father. into nothing but Kool-Aid. Pablo Neruda. Because you asked for something sweet, we dragged out the blender, pulled out a tall glass. The weight of this, a heavy newborn in summer. You once cut cubes for us, piled them in a green bowl. We dragged out the blender, pulled out a tall glass. Mom tapped the next syringe. Jeff adjusted your cap. You once cut cubes for us, piled them in a green bowl. We angled the straw, told you of an elixir from the islands. Mom tapped the next syringe. Jeff adjusted your cap. The white pill of sun flickered through the redbud tree. We angled the straw, told you of an elixir from the islands because you were dying. The white pill of sun flickered through the redbud tree. The weight of this, a heavy newborn in summer, because you were dying, because you asked for something sweet. So I'll read one more, the final poem from Elixir. My dog's name is Maddox. That's what you need to know. My dog is depressed. He sits taxidermied in a patch of grass, an island far from our lounges, his bag of treats, our sun chips. It is April, and he'd normally be here beside us, or wedging his nose in mole holes or the neighbor's corner fence, or suddenly lifting his muzzle like a German chef who was trained in France, catching nuances of the bone he stashed last week, fresh cut grass, bloodroot, or a soupçon of mushrooms from the river bottom. The dog in the adjacent backyard to ours is gone. Not dead gone, but moved gone. But Maddox doesn't know that. This dog for 7 years he bolted to, barked at, sniffed, a dog he never saw but through a crack in the fence, which was everything. Dusk, he still rouses under hunter orange skies, thinking he smelled a rustling, and begins that Weimaraner tiptoe to the fence. While nighttime, he sits trembling by our darkened patio table for hours. My dog knows this world of loss, pays attention to the slivers of time between my blinks, knows about rain, that there's no grace in leaving without saying anything. I saw our neighbor's flat-coated retriever that morning of their departure from the passenger side of a U-Haul, pulling away down Grand River Avenue, chin weaving out of a partially open window. He was looking to, lips in a gummy, toothy grin, nosing the most wondrous wind. So I'm gonna move away from Elixir. I have a new book coming out in February, as I mentioned, called Oh Body of Bliss. And this poem is largely about, whereas Elixir was about what is it like to be in a home or a home dwelling, this poem is much more about what is it like to live in a body and be more comfortable in a body on the earth, and also very much also about what it's like to be a woman who grows up in the 80s. So I'll read two poems. St. Michael, the Steelers, and the Red Lobster. Women should not adorn the body with ornaments, Peter says. But in the mid-'80s, every Madonna bangle and hoop was a tunnel out of Western PA. I could have piked and dove, ducked, tucked, and rolled through their glint. Timothy cautions to exercise the womanly body profiteth little, only godliness is profitable. I felt God running the Milan school. Only a few girls on the team had that kind of endurance. Corinthians says women must remain silent in churches. I never said Jesus Christ watching the Steelers, but I curled the phrase, the Lord's name in vain, tongued the slant rhyme of it, how it sounded like sin, something worthy of a box with a priest hoarding my sins as if stacking crisp ones. I tell you, the best part of Saturday Mass was after Saturday Mass. Red Lobster with its red carpet, hush puppies, ultimate feast, and the trinity of my parents and brother, my father, muse of suffering, the son he was harder on, my mother, proclaimed survivor, each distinct but a single essence, all styling and dressed up after a day weeding the hill. I performed the sitting, standing, kneeling, and though filled in the baptism of our above ground pool, though filled with thanks like the last stanza of a closing hymn, my brother and I couldn't stop staring at this one stained glass window. What have I taken? A love that makes my knees buckle. In the background, a landscape of mountains, a small town. In the foreground, Saint Michael about to slay the green dragon under a sandaled foot, every organ chord, not here, not this town, this creed. We sat in a pew in the back. My mother let me sit on the end. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. This is my last poem. Breaking my father out of the hospice unit to go to the Italian market. Even the magnolia was incredulous at its bloom. Glass doors agape behind us as we rolled him out, still gowned. Dad's chair barely fit down, an owl of amaretti, olives, beans, tomatoes, each pasta shape its own regione. This small store crowded and warm, the owner accommodating with his nods. We thought we could reach for peaches or look into a murky crock of escarole soup or stack pizzelles and get another dozen years. We all did it. Grab bread cubes in oil and grab that deliciously stubborn broken biscotti, working it long in the mouth. What can I say? Except we'd taken turns in a faded green chair for 7 days, sobs wedged in the solar plexus as in a vise, my mother on repeat, these people have a goal. My brother knowing the right drug to keep dad from becoming sedated, and me finding the one willing surgeon. I still feel the aliveness of that precise moment we changed our minds, that urgency to celebrate an effervescence that comes from resolve. He died 3 long years later. Forgive me, Father. Forgive me, Mother. What stays with me most was the swerving, how we navigated Dad over winter's new cracks around potholes of East Liberty, skidded on the gritty spring ash of Pittsburgh, my brother pushing, my mother to the left, me to the right, the masses of bystanders pointing, laughing, waving as we navigated a park, a Wendy's parking lot, the get-go gas stations, workers with their thumbs up smoking outside the back of a diner. But we had to stay focused, tried not to look back. And even now I can't quiet those voices. Even now I still hear them. Where do you think they're headed? What are they doing? What the hell are they doing? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janine. Oh, I'd like to ask everybody to unmute. Yeah. So if anybody wants to comment, that would be.
There were so many lines that I wrote in the chat that I lost track because there was like one after the other. It's so incredible. Incredible. Just absolutely
breathtaking.
The two of you set each other's poems off. That's what I enjoyed so much. So different, and yet around the same emotions.
Can you say a little bit about how they seem different to you, Robbie? Like
the sensibility was different. Janine's have that little edge of Black humor, right? And even humor, straight on sometimes. Connie, it's not, it's different. It's dead on, serious. Yeah.
As it should be.
Looking straight into the suffering.
Which is kind of interesting because I have like super dark humor outside my poetry and my own personal life, but I'm not very good at it in poetry. But
interesting.
Janine, that's such a beautiful collection. And you know what? I also wanted to not be remiss in mentioning Phyllis's collection, Full Moon Herald, which I've read, and it's a beautiful collection. So please don't forget to look into that. It was in the chat as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Does anyone else want to, if you want to raise your hand, does anybody else like to comment? We have lots to say, so yeah, we'll talk your ear off for sure.
Thank you all so much for your comments.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff in the chat. Yeah, people are raving. That's
I didn't
sweet.
actually, it's kind of funny because you never know when you're invited or you read with somebody, how it will work out or how it pairs. So thanks, Robbie, because it's good to know, that's a nice blend.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Sandy has a few things to say. Oh, Sherry, yeah. Join us.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
It was
raising your
a
hand.
wonderful afternoon of poetry. And I have a personal question since I have a daughter in Michigan. Grand River Drive is in Ada. That's not where you live, Janine, is it?
Oh my goodness, you have a daughter in Michigan on Grand River Drive?
In
Is it?
Ada,
So
Michigan.
so Sherry, I live off of Grand River Avenue. Would that
Oh, no.
Okay.
Okay,
different?
different. Then.
Okay.
That's too personal anyway. Thank you. And I love the poetry, both of you. And Connie, thanks for alerting me to this. It was a wonderful afternoon.
But I want to tell you, I hope you're not embarrassed by this, Sherry, but Sherry has always been my proofer, and they call her Eagle Eye. Her last name's Sheehan. They call her Eagle Eye Sheehan. She's the most amazing proofer ever. So I really appreciate her. Even when I have little things I didn't catch, so you might want to just fix this little thing, but she's amazing at that. She's like a savant.
It's
Oh,
an
boy.
affliction. And I'll say
Well, are
goodbye.
you taking new people, new patients?
She kept me as her client even in retirement.
Oh, wow. That's great. Yeah. It's not that easy to find somebody,
It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, goodness. So let's see. So we have, Sandy says you are both skillful at landing your poems. It's such an important ingredient of a strong poem. And actually, maybe we should start with that. I have a whole list I wrote down of your last lines, which I was calling last line extravaganza, because both of you are just really, really there. So you punch it. It's to me one of the most important parts of the poem. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I guess all of the parts are important. But
if I have a poem that I'm reading that I am elsewhere and I think it's really good in the beginning, in the middle, but if it fizzles out at the end or does some sort of a cliche, then that was disappointing. So it's very important for me to have the last line be just power packed. And also, I'm they have the alternate endings in DVDs. Well, then we used to have DVDs. So I'm like, I don't like that. And you're like, no, it's a good ending. I like it. And then you're like 2 days ago, I'm like, this is ridiculous. I hate this ending. So then I'm like, I'll go out to my husband, who's also writing with 5 versions. I'll pick one. Because it has to make me feel like I got punched in the gut. If it doesn't make me feel like that, it's not going to make you feel like that.
Right. Well, so I'm curious, both of you, how you work on that. I know sometimes I'm sitting there and I just feel like I'm pounding my head trying to figure it out. It doesn't come that way. It comes from somewhere else. So, and maybe that's part of the spirituality of writing poetry. I don't know, but let me just read off a few of these. I see a small heart pulsing, how sorrow fills a cavern and keeps beating. I mean, do you want to open that up a little bit? I mean, Connie or Janine, either one of you, it's like that just says so much.
I always try to go to the big, the bigger story, but then go to the little finite part of a story, like a tiny little heart of a squirrel, and how all of us, to make it universal, that we all have how does our small hearts keep beating, even though we're filled with sorrow, and my acceptance of the squirrel is an acceptance of me and my own darkness. That's the whole point of the poem. But
yeah, I thought to me, it was also about finding a way to care about that dark squirrel that you didn't really like, or the speaker.
Yeah, because we reject, I know for me, I can't speak, I reject large parts of myself and who I was. I thought, well, horrible and evil. I was told they were horrible and evil, and you carry this kind of darkness with you.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, go ahead.
It's either you can my belief is that can either destroy you, or you can write poetry or do something else with it. Other people have darkness and they'll go help people and heal and stuff. But I really wanted that. I'm glad that line worked at the end, because I can't even count sometimes how many times I rework my endings. It's endless.
Yeah. Connie, I love, you should know this. I earmarked so many of your poems, but Omen is one of them. So you can see there's a little earmark, there's an earmark there. that's really a stunning ending. I think to answer your question, Phyllis, in terms of endings, this is part of the joy and mystery and celebration, I think, of poetry specifically, that yes, the last line has got to matter. And then secondly, the opening has to matter. You really got to get your readers. But I think there's this thing that happens where I want to be surprised when the poem ends. I don't always know where the poem's going to end, but at the same time, I also want my readers' expectations to be met too. And I try to keep both of those things, in mind. I think as I'm editing, you had asked, how do you sort of land on endings? I think some of the things that I do, just like sometimes when I open a poem, I realize it takes me, in my first drafts, it takes me a little while to sort of get to the poem. And so in revision, I usually will cut the first couple lines, and I realize, oh, I need to start the poem on the third or fourth line. Yeah. Conversely, I do that with my endings. A lot of times in revision, I realize, you know what, I really don't need to sum up this poem. And so a lot of times I think that my endings are really, in my earlier drafts, 2 or 3 lines up.
Same for me. Same for me.
Yeah, you just kind of let that image kind of stay and just, sometimes, just need to say it straight. Or my mentor, Dan Albergotti, says, when in doubt, land on an image.
Or emotion. I always do land on image or emotion. Yeah. But I do, but mine's are like sometimes stanzas back. I'm like, I don't know why I felt late. I needed all this over explanation. You're over telling the reader. They don't even need to know that. You've already got the whole point of it ended here. But it's very hard to know. It's days or weeks. I mean, I'm usually, I don't want somebody that does revision for years, but days or weeks or months later, I'm like, just cut the whole last 2 stanzas. Unless that's your poem right there.
Yeah.
You gotta be ruthless. Yeah. So here's one from Janine that blows my mind also. Lately, there is little spring of fall. Is that right? Spring of fall? But keep the large, bright mum in its pot until the flowers are dull, their necks broken.
That's just unbelievable.
I mean,
to take that and then say the neck's broken. I mean, at the very end, and that's just jarringly good.
Yeah.
Like if you could never look at a flower the same way again after that line, their neck's broken.
Right. And it's an example of, it's such a dark ending, right? Yeah, that is
beautiful.
Just really important. It's important for it to be that way. That's the emotion that you're feeling, right? Yeah. Do you want to say anything about that one, Janine? Or
yeah, it's hard because in some ways I know where my lines come from and I don't. But there's a truth that I love chrysanthemums. I mean, I have a big burgundy chrysanthemum out in a really, really big, heavy pot, in the front of my house. I mean, if you come, but the truth is, in 3 weeks or so, those necks are going to be broken. And I love mums, but I love mums, but I hate them because they just don't last long enough. And so I think that image is really true of me because it's a repetitive image. I live that image. I live in that image. But I also, I guess in reading back that poem, I think it's also a reflection of my interiority that I want to be I want a seize the day moment, enjoy this life. But there is darkness. It's going to end, and it may end badly, and we may end it. And I think that it's okay to have those two things coexist. And I also think that that's also one of the reasons that I write poetry, is to have those two ironies stand, the beauty with the darkness. And so that's why I think I was okay with having that be the end of an Ars Poetica.
Yeah. 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 So, yeah, thank you. So, Catherine. Thanks for
Yes, I
raising
noted
your
that
hand.
line too, and I can lower my hand.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like, you know, ending a poem about a hula hoop with a death rattle.
Mhm.
Similar, the juxtaposition of the
I
two.
backed myself into that poem because all I always came, do you ever, and a lot of poets do this, you have the last line first and then you build it backwards, because I always remember the hula hoop when they came out and how, and then of course dying in the death rattle, and it just came to me immediately, and then I had to build the poem from that backwards.
Oh, interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Because
really
it came as a
interesting.
surprise at the end.
Catherine, to bring those two together, that's really a wonderful connection there.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry. I have trouble hearing a lot the first time I hear something, so I'll
Yeah.
have to listen again, and
Yeah.
maybe I'll
I'm the
write to
same
you,
way.
Janine,
Yeah.
later.
I think it's that way for us all. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder about having readings where each poem gets read more than once, but
I think
That's
that's a good
kinda-
idea.
maybe I should try that. Yeah.
Myrna had a
Well,
question, it seemed also.
Oh, good. Yeah. Myrna.
Myrna, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, this is about a line in Connie's poetry, and forgive me if I'm not quoting it perfectly, but there was a line that went sort of like when your father told you that he can snap you or break you like a branch.
Yeah, like a twig,
Like
snap
that.
your arm like a twig.
Yeah. And my thoughts were on that. Did that follow you later in life? And was it ever an impetus to perhaps say, no, you won't, or no, I won't let you? And did that have anything to do with your writing poetry?
Probably all of it did. I mean, my dad had a very cruel way of teasing those, saying those things really mean, but we knew the undercurrent was that it was true. And in there, when there's that much terror in a house, you do not ever, I mean, you don't even look at that person wrong. You do not ever say, I mean, the only way I could ever say this is done, you were wrong, it's over, was to leave and never let him be around my children. But I think all those painful, you know, that phrase was in my head for a long time, for many years. And then one day it just kind of floated up in my consciousness. And then I felt like I wanted to liken the snap your arm like a twig to a tree fort that you would make with trees, and then kind of in the healing process make something out of that, because he would actually take your arm and like almost, you know, but not really break it, but let you know he could break it. It was supposed to be funny, but it wasn't. And so yes, it's affected me my whole life, but I could never, I mean, you get knocked across the room if you looked at my dad wrong. So no, I never challenged it, but I did challenge it when I left. And you know, they never really admitted for what they did, admit eventually what they did, but their punishment was that they never got to be part of my life, and they never got to be part of my children's life because they didn't want to heal. They just wanted to just gloss over it. So.
By the way, that particular line really went for the gut. It's
Mhm.
The snap your arm like a twig one?
it's unforgettable.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Catherine's raising again.
Oh, Catherine, yeah. Thanks, Connie.
Oh, you're
You're
muted.
muted, Catherine.
There you go.
Okay, another reaction when I heard the fish poem again, you know, about the eyes and everything. And I thought, oh, you actually challenged him, you know, when you asked that question about killing in Korea. Maybe, or that's how it seemed.
It did. And some, I mean, I was the most mouthy. There's always a most rebellious one. It'd be me. And so
Yeah, that was a good indirect way of addressing it.
addressing it, I'd ask quite, it was such a weird dichotomy though, because like, it's so weird to live in a house where somebody brutalizes you, but then says, don't sit too close to the TV because it will hurt your eyes. You know, how is a child supposed to understand how they're trying to protect their eyes from seeing, but then they do all these other terrible things? So it's It's just such a hard thing. It's like sometimes I'm surprised I have a modicum of sanity, but I do. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think you talked about being strong, and that's, that's really obvious that.
yeah, I mean, I got in trouble the most. I mean, there's this theory in family therapy. I took a year of master's in, is that there's always a child that holds the anger for the family. There's always a child that is this either the scapegoat or the one that even the family hero, the one that shuts down. They all have roles to balance out the
Right.
dysfunction in the family. So I held the anger for too long. I had a lot of anger issues in my 20s and 30s and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was angry at everything. I understood why, but I didn't understand why. But of course,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you write about it, it doesn't come as a rant, which is like a really skillful thing to do. Yeah. You're nodding your head too, Janine.
Yeah, I think that's pretty stunning about Connie's work, is how it's almost like she is stepping outside of herself in a surreal kind of way, and can be so meditative about these experiences that are happening to her. And it's just like, I just think that's stunning.
It's funny that you say that, because for people that know something about psychology and trauma, is there's a process called dissociation where you kind of like leave yourself. And I really felt like I was floating over myself a lot. And there's a way that in that experience, there's something spiritual that happens. I mean, it's the terror that drives you out of your body, but really it kind of gives you this like other view. And so it does kind of give you that meditative kind of view. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine.
Well, and then when you write about it, it helps you connect it
Catherine,
more.
unmute.
Oh, Catherine.
There you go.
Yeah, I couldn't see my face. Yeah, Janine, you had a line about inside outside, philosopher of or philosophy of, and that really struck me too, and it somehow relates to Connie's writing. So I saw another,
Yeah,
some kind of link.
Catherine, I wanted to mention that she's really she read Prime Meridian. She asked, she's really into, we have a whole long email kind of relationship, but she asked me really interesting questions sometimes about Prime Meridian. And it's just, I wanted to tell you, it's really meant a lot to me, like how much that book affected you, Catherine. And that you're so in touch with trauma and how it affects people. And I really appreciate that about Catherine.
I'm very thoughtful and wise in terms of picking up on things.
They just land,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye again. Come back soon. So Donna. Welcome, Donna.
Connie and Janine, as y'all were reading, you can tell I'm from the South since I said y'all.
Love it.
It reminded me of a quote by Bruce Dern, the actor. And he said, art requires being private in public. If you can't or won't, you might as well go home. And, I'm glad y'all didn't go home. I'm glad that you shared so deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'll remember that. Thank you. I like that. I love Bruce Dern as an actor. But I think people know when you're being real, because I think we all want to connect our real selves to other people. I think that we're born for human connection. And when people, and you can lay yourself out there, people are more compelled to be their own real selves with you.
Absolutely. So just building on that, Connie, I wanted to talk a little bit about Janine's poem about breaking my father out of a hospice unit. I when I was reading that, so this whole idea of truth telling and what's and the difference between truth telling and what's factual in poetry. So when I was reading that, I couldn't tell, and I don't know that I even needed to know, but I was wondering, well, did that really happen? And we've been, talking a lot tonight about truth telling and authenticity, which I think your poems just dripping with that. So when you have a poem where it's not necessarily factual. Now, I gather, I don't know, do you want to tell us, Janine, whether that was factual or not? Or
Yeah, that is, it's completely factual. I mean, for what it's worth, I have lots of wild, family stories that are great fodder for poetry. And, I'm grateful my family supports me in writing them. Yeah, breaking my father out of the hospice unit to go to the Italian market, that is very autobiographical. It's as I experienced it and saw it and observed it. And I really tried to, I took a workshop with Vivi Francis, and I hadn't written this poem yet. And she said, you've really got to mine the interior and write those poems that are so difficult for you. She said, you might not publish them. You might not want to publish them, but you've got to write them. And I knew this was a poem that I needed to write. Because it really was about, my father was dying, and he should have died. Everyone at the hospital was saying, this is too much on your mother. It's too much on your family. It's too much. You all need to stop now. You need to stop.
Yeah.
And we didn't. We couldn't let him go. And but it was such an extraordinary thing to break him out of the hospice unit I mean, it just was what we did. And it's even now my family still laughs about it. And it's just absurd.
But also beautiful. Yeah.
I knew I needed to poem it. And I will say, I teach in my classes that poems are fictive. I think, if the dog needs to die in the poem, but the dog didn't die, the dog should die. I mean, I think a poem has its own intelligence and needs to do a certain thing. And so therefore, I believe mostly poems are fictive. But I do think poetry is a very, very broad field, right? So you've got documentary poetry and you've got autobiographical poetry in there. And then but I think it's best as readers, unless you're told otherwise, when you come to a poem, that there are elements of it that are fictive. But that one is as autobiographical as a poem I've ever written. Yeah.
I just love it. I can't wait to see. I
God.
can't wait to read your new book.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
so evocative.
I like what you're saying about the interior of the poem. I mean, that's a really interesting. That's something really important to consider when you're writing.
Say more
About the interior of the poem. What color is it? Does it drive you? is it just only good at the beginning and the end, but there's no examination in the middle of all the threads that connect together? Because no matter how good the beginning or the ending is, I think you have to just really have a strong, either make sure you follow the metaphorical construct, that you have metaphorical harmony, that you don't contradict yourself, or if you do, it's purposeful. So
yeah, and related to that, I never forgot this. I will never forget it. Vivi Francis said, you as a writer have to mine the interior, and you've got to have the courage. You've got to have the courage to go really, really deeply. And I think, I don't know, I found that I feel like I've been rewarded when I have done that. I have felt like I've turned my suffering into art. And I felt like when I have done that those poems people respond to the most because they have taken a risk. And I've shown that vulnerability. So I was really grateful for that. I think it's yeah.
But there's also the interior of a manuscript that you struggle with. So you put the collection together and then you realize, well, I already had a poem like that earlier, or I've used the word sacrament too many times. Because as a collection, you can't overuse certain either concepts or words or metaphors, because if you did it, so you have to either tweak one or take one out, or it's really hard when you're doing the interior of the collection to make sure it's cohesive and follows, and there's not repetition. It's not the same idea or expressed the same way. So I've done that where it's I have the word sacrament 5 times in this manuscript. I have to find something else. So, you go substitute words or whatever.
You got to search for it. Yeah.
Then it has to have the same, but sometimes it's good if I search for another word, it changes the whole meaning, but in a good way.
In a good way, yeah, exactly. Well, so speaking of the meanings, I thought I would just to end us, and I have a poem I'm going to read to close us out. I looked up the definition of elixir, and I thought it was just fascinating. So here we go. A sweetened aromatic solution of alcohol and water, serving as a vehicle for medicine. A substance believed to maintain life indefinitely. A substance or medicine believed to have the power to cure all ills. And then an underlying principle. Let's see if there's anything else. A tincture. So yeah, so that just that broadened out, Janine, that just broadened out for me your book even more. I know it's the theme is home, but that, all of that about medicine and prolonging life indefinitely. And I imagine we're thinking about that too, but it's just so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, so let me thank everybody for coming and for all the wonderful comments and discussion, and both
Thank
of
you from me too. Thank you to Phyllis for hosting this, and Janine, of course, thank you, and for all of you and your wonderful comments and questions.
Yes, absolutely. So let me read my poem to close us out. And I'm going to go, I had two, what do I want to go with? I had two that I have to decide. So I think I'll go with this one. Not even sure why, but here we go. It's also from my book. It's called Halls of Fame. Today I learn we come from stardust, you and me, every atom in our bodies from a star exploded, a supernova living inside your skin, my heart. Inside Brian May's astrophysicist hands, playing juiced up guitar for Queen, the star bomb plunging into Joni Mitchell's fingers, holding the pen that wrote about the billion-year-old carbon, voice a beacon showing the way to the Woodstock she wouldn't be able to attend. A way for the universe to know itself, a star in the hustling heavens for each human on earth. The stars that died so you could live, spread their carbon into our apple pies, back in the garden, nitrogen on your oak tree, calcium in my teeth and bones, the oxygen in Joni's lungs when she sang, "You Are Golden." Music, sweet headliner in the Stardust Parade, propeller of our species, epigenetic picnic, phosphorescent streaming glitter on headliners at the Apollo, James Brown, Michael Jackson, the Roxy, Frank Zappa, Bob Marley, echoes of guitar like race car meteors ascending, leading the parade, Freddie Mercury, falling off the movie screen into star sprinkles in my eyes and ears. I'm surfing into proximity of brilliance, Freddie, who donated songs to the world, his son bulldozing the stage, tunes battering, thrashing in his feet, legs, body of a man on fire, halfway up there already. These songs, most of us know the words and melodies, blazing, shooting, championing, rocking. Perhaps this is why I find myself weeping over the baby bok choy at the farmer's market today, loving everything, the farmers, shoppers, the vegetables themselves, the stardust that made me, the garden that grew us. Will we ever get back?
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janine and Phyllis and everybody here, all my poetry buddies and new people. Thank you.